Ladies and gentle gamers, welcome back to To Be Determined. In today's video, I'm going to be going over all of the major posts that we've gotten for the Foraging update throughout the years, just to kind of get us ready for what should be coming pretty soon. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a few things that I've missed because the admins tend to like put a tiny little piece of information at the end of a lot of threads, but I've got all the big ones right here. So if you guys enjoy, make sure to drop a like, smash the sub button. You know when the Foraging update comes out, I'll be making a bunch of content about it, a bunch of guides and everything like that. So if you want to see that, smash the sub button. We're closing in on 20k subs. And without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first thread we're going to go over is the 1.0 design thread for skills. This thread was released on September 22nd, 2021, and they don't talk too much about the Foraging update here. It's more about how they want to design skills in general. So TLDR, they want a variety of gameplay, so all the skills should feel at least a little bit different. They want them all to have a part in the progression of the game. They need to be fun, of course. They also need to have a decent progression line within the skill, for example, Heart of the Mountain and unlocking different armors, things like that. And they also want the skills to be rewarding. But this is one of the first times that we hear about the Foraging update. In the example section at the bottom of this post, they say a new Foraging island is currently in the works, and while the main gameplay will remain to cut trees, this island will have a very unique twist which will appeal to some players. This island, and Foraging as a whole, will be the place to obtain the best cloaks in the game, and more on cloaks in a later thread. So back when this post came out, we didn't actually have equipment in the game, so they were just kind of planning out where all the best stuff is. So we've got the best necklace, the Rift necklace from the Rift. I'm not sure if they're still planning on releasing the best cloak in the game through Foraging, but we haven't seen the best piece of armor in the game other than the Rift necklace. So hopefully we get some other pieces of the best in slot equipment, and it would be cool if the cloak is still coming from the Foraging island. But that's really all there was in that thread. The next thread is the 1.0 design thread 9, and this thread was released on May 2nd, 2023, so nearly 2 years after the last thread talking about Foraging update. And this thread is focusing on the Foraging island and Minecraft version, and this is where they mention that the Foraging update is going to be on a newer version of Minecraft. Basically, they want to be able to use latest Minecraft features on the new islands while allowing older islands to remain 1.8 available. So if you weren't around when this thread was announced, you may not know this, but whenever Foraging Island comes out, it will be 1.20 or higher. So you will have to play on 1.20, aka the latest version for that island, if you plan to play on the Foraging Island, but everywhere else 1.8 should still work. Here they talk about their first designs for the Foraging Island and their first design for the Abyss. So the Abyss was going to be a fishing island where you would be underwater for most of the time, but while they were designing this, they realized that without the 1.14 version, which added all of the coral things and all of the different unique types of fish, dolphins, all of that stuff in the newer versions of Minecraft, they were missing out on that. So they really wanted to actually make it so that they could use it. But of course, it had taken them 2 years at this point. Now it's been over 3, and they're basically explaining here that it's very difficult to do. But here we get a first look at some of their first concepts of the Foraging Island. Again, we don't know if this is going to be added into the main version whenever this comes out, but just looking at this image here, you can see they are using some of the different blocks from the warped forest in the Nether. I believe this ground is from the warped forest, and then there's also these different little warped roots, and of course the warped fences. And you can see on the right side of the screen, this is called the Mystical Forest. So again, this is from over a year ago. It may not end up making it to the full release, but this is at least an early concept, so we should get something looking very similar to this as part of the Foraging Island. Here's another part of the Foraging Island that they showed, another section of the Mystical Forest, and you can see here that they again have some water section down here, or I think it's supposed to look like water. It may just be glass, similar to the mist that we have in the Dwarven Mines. So I think it looks like glass to me, but it could be water. You can also see they're using like black stone on this side of the build over here. This looks like gray concrete, and they've got some deep slate and things like that too. So they're really taking advantage of being able to use this new palette of blocks. However, they may eventually update everything to the latest version, but that will be a long time. But here they also show some other things they've been working on with the latest versions of Minecraft to possibly release in the very far future. This shouldn't come out with Foraging update, but they've got a lot of custom UIs that they've made. And again, this is not final. They've done a lot of different versions of these that we've seen through different patch notes, which I'll show some of them later, but these are just some pretty cool stuff that they may release with 1.0. Again, custom texture for the sword there, custom dialogue for NPCs. So that's all pretty cool. But we're back to the Foraging Island again. At the time of this design thread, again, over a year ago, they were thinking of releasing new trees with their own new collections. Not very surprising. They did the same with mining, adding mithril and titanium and all that stuff. So hopefully we get some pretty cool collections. There's also a new axe mechanic called Sweep, which controls how many logs an axe can break. Basically, it's mining spread, but for axes. However, some trees will have sweep resistance, and 35 sweep won't cut 35 logs at once. They're also going to have some new creatures roaming the island, some of them peaceful, but a few of them hostile. They're also experimenting with Foraging's Heart of the Mountain system with some of these creatures. It would require capturing them, raising them, and combining or merging them to provide a selection of passive abilities. I think this part is going to end up evolving into the hunting update, which we will talk about here in a little bit. So this may not be a part of the Foraging Heart of the Mountain system. It may just be a part of the hunting system now. They're also going to make sure that you don't have to worry about other players cutting trees before you do, and you may end up preferring to cut trees with other players. So sounds like foraging is going to be good to do with a party, similar to things like worm membrane fishing and things like that. But again, all of those are ideas that they're playing around with and may not happen when the actual update drops, or may just be slightly different. So that design thread again was from 2023. The next one is a full year later in 2024, and here we get an image of what I'm guessing is a more modern version of what we saw in the last picture. Just to me, all of these pillars and things, stone looking pillars, looks very similar to this section, but they've got the water actually built in here, and then they've got some vines to make it feel a little bit more swamp like. Again, this could be a completely new section, but to me, it looks like a rebranded version of the mystical forest that we saw earlier. But here's where we hear the first name of the first island, Galatia. So Galatia is the name of the first foraging island, but there will be many foraging islands as they get released. I think the first update that we get for foraging is only going to have the first island, Galatia, but in the future we'll get a few more. But their plan is to add tree gifts. So basically, if you contribute 10% of chopping down a tree, then you get a tree gift. So as long as you have a squad with you, it'll be faster to chop down more trees, so you get more tree gifts. So very similar to loot sharing, just on trees. Here they talk about tree capitator and the sweep, which we talked about earlier, and we get an actual look at one of the new items that they are planning on adding, the fig stone axe, which has mystic damage, foraging fortune, and 24 sweep, but it gains an extra sweep every 10,000 logs cut in Galatia, with a maximum of 20 extra sweep, and that would be for cutting 200,000 logs. So it's going to take a while to max this thing out, but mystic damage is just a brand new stat that they'll talk about a little bit later, and it's a pretty cool concept. But here they also talk about toughness, which is basically just breaking power for trees. So depending on the toughness of the tree is how much sweep you'll need to cut a certain amount of logs. So if you use 35 sweep on an oak tree, you get 35 logs. But if you use it on one of these newer trees that has higher toughness, you may only get 5 or 7 logs. But each tree on Galatia will also have its own unique cutting style, adding a layer of skill to the process. And the first tree that they're introducing is the fig tree. For this tree, you'll have to cut the branches of it and then the trunk. But if you try to cut the trunk first, you only sweep half of the logs that you should have as a penalty. So you can cut it with your own way if you don't want to do it the way that you're supposed to, but it's not as fast. They're also going to add an axe throwing mechanic, which I assume is going to be very similar to Axe of the Shredded, but axes with sweep will have an axe throwing ability allowing you to target logs from a distance, but you'll only get half of the logs, so only use it when the tree is too tall for you to reach. They also reveal some key features of the island, as well as another picture here, so we get to see some of the buildings that are going to be on the island and another cool little section. So this section looks like it's got oak leaves. I don't know if that's oak logs there. It may be a new type of tree that they're introducing that just uses similar logs. These could be the fig trees for all we know, but we do get to see some of the cool new builds that they're working on and a little bit of the new blocks being added. So we've got some lanterns around the map here, which is really cool, and some of the hanging signs as well. Plus, I think these are mud bricks and things over here on the left side as well, so they're really taking good use of the new build. But of course, they're going to be adding a Heart of the Forest, which is going to be very similar to Heart of the Mountain. There will also be a Starlin Sisters, so these 3 sisters are going to be similar to Jacob, except their concurs don't put you against other players, but it will be all about your own performance. But they will be always ongoing, giving rewards every in-game day. So that's pretty nice. Every 20 minutes, you get a guaranteed reward based on how much foraging you did. But here we get to hear about mystic damage. A lot of the monsters on Galatia will have a mystic shield, meaning that you simply won't be able to damage them before their shield is down. Only items with mystic damage will damage those shields. So like that fig stone axe that we saw earlier, you will need mystic damage to damage their shields, and then you can use other items like Hyperion to take down their regular health. There will also be berries and 3 islands on Galatia. So Galatia will have 3 separate islands, but you'll find different types of berries across those islands that can be used to craft hunting items, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, when they were designing the Abyss Island a while back, they made a pressure system, but since they never actually made the Abyss Island, they're going to be using it here on Galatia. Pressure will make your respiration bubbles go down faster the deeper you dive into the waters. Running out of air while in deep waters will deal massive damage, so make sure you stack up extra respiration and pressure resistance before you adventure into the deeper rooms of the lake. So it seems a lot like the Rift Time feature, where you're going to need a certain amount of pressure resistance or respiration to be able to reach the deeper parts of the underwater cave. But here we get to see a brand new dragon. You can see it has 3 little eggs here on the ground next to it, very similar to the golden dragon in the Crystal Hollows. So I'm guessing this is going to be a very similar mechanic where you'll need a certain amount of coins and a certain amount of items to be able to get this new dragon pet. The question is, how good is it going to be, and what exactly will it be used for? I have a suspicion that it's going to be a very good fishing pet, or maybe it gets extra magic find, but only against sea creatures. But they haven't really released anything talking about this too much. We just get to see the picture here, so it's all speculation. But here they announced god temples. So gods used to exist in the world of SkyBlock, but they were dethroned by an ancient civilization, most likely the precursors. But the temples can still be found throughout the world, and reactivating them will allow you to become a worshiper. The very first temples will be introduced on Galatia, and they grant global stat buffs to everyone who unlocks them, and extra buffs to people who are worshiping there. So the more worshippers a temple has, the stronger the god becomes. So I'm guessing that there's going to be different temples for different sections of the game, and you can choose to worship one single temple, and depending on how many people are worshiping at that temple is how strong the buffs get. So for example, if let's say Paul gets elected and there's a combat system, a combat temple, then most people are going to go and worship at the combat temple. And so if you've chosen to do that, the more people that do it, maybe there's like a milestone for 1 million people or a milestone for 100,000, depending on how many people have basically voted at this temple. I'm thinking it'll be similar to the vote system. You don't have to actively be at that temple to get the buffs. As long as you voted for that god at this time, then you'll get those buffs, and depending on how many other players have also voted for them is how strong the buffs will be. So if only 100,000 people have voted for this temple, then you'll probably get a lot less stats versus going to another temple that has 1 million. But I'm basing all of that off of these 2 paragraphs. So again, we don't know exactly how it'll work. Plus, this was released like almost a year ago now, so a lot of it may have changed. This is also the first place that we hear about the hunting update, and we get to see another picture of a mud swamp section. But basically, the hunting skill is going to be a brand new skill that gets added with Galatia. And for this part of the update, they made a whole new design thread 2 weeks after the last one, on April 24th, 2024. And the thing they want to fix with this update is the attribute system. Basically, attributes have caused a lot of problems in progression throughout the game, as well as planning out future updates to make things stronger. They have a whole list of 7 things that they don't really love about attributes, including their balancing with other items, balancing issues with scaling, total attributes required for max level, current limitations with combat and fishing, the finality of attributes on items, the RNG of getting god rolls, and perk justification. So with all that being said, they decided to revamp the attribute update with the hunting update. The concept of this update is that many creatures throughout SkyBlock will have an attribute attached to them, and hunting them will allow you to gain stacks of that attribute. Hunting will primarily be an active endeavor, requiring players to use specific items to hunt a creature. Most of the mobs in the game are combat mobs, so for those guys, you'll have to weaken them and then capture them. They're also going to introduce some non-aggressive creatures that can be caught using different items, but you'll also be able to hunt in a passive manner using traps or salts, which At this point, we have seen a iteration of traps added to the garden. The pest traps are a pretty cool item. You just throw some baits in there and then they catch different mobs every 15 minutes. So it'd be pretty cool to see something like that added for hunting, where instead of getting pests, you get mobs, and whenever you turn them in after capturing them, you get a certain amount of attributes back. Now, when this design thread was released, they were planning on limiting the amount of attributes you could have active at a time. For example, up to 4 combat attributes, up to 2 foraging, up to 2 hunting, 2 fishing, and then all of these other ones, you'd have a limit of attributes. But I believe in one of the threads I'll show here later, they've decided to make all the attributes be available at the same time, so you don't have to choose between a few of them. Basically, they felt like there were too many things you'd have to choose from now. You have to choose what armor you're wearing, you have to choose what equipment you're using, have to choose your magical power and what tuning points you have, and then adding attributes to what you have to choose on top of that just felt like a lot. So they decided to make it so the attributes will most likely be weaker, but you'll have them all active at the same time. So if you have a bunch of them, then you'll still be very powerful. But a few examples of attributes in the new system is the Hunter attribute, which we currently have, will be obtained from hunting sea archers. The Blazing attribute, which we also currently have, will be obtained from hunting flares. And a new attribute, Crystal Blessing, will give you extra gemstone powder and will be obtained from hunting fists. Attributes will still have 10 tiers, but the scaling will be significantly revised. Players will no longer need 512 stacks to reach the max level. And additionally, most attributes will receive buffs since each attribute can only be selected once from the menu. So that part is no longer true, at least in their current build for the hunting update. They've decided to change this. So generally, attributes will not receive buffs anymore. In fact, I'm expecting they'll receive pretty significant nerfs just to deal with power scaling. But in the long term, with the latest updates to Minecraft, they plan to introduce a variety of creatures across different areas of the game, enriching the hunting experience. And we do get to see a picture of another attribute that they're planning on adding, Forest Brutality, which grants extra strength while on Foraging Island. And you can see right here that this shard looks like a stray. So I believe that we'll hear about that in a little bit, but strays are some of the mobs that are getting added onto the Foraging Island. Here we get to hear about the precursors, a long lost civilization that created a fusion machine. Basically what this will do is allow you to fuse different attribute shards that you have already claimed. For example, if I have already maxed out my Magic Find attribute and I get some extra Magic Find shards, then I can take those and combine them to make a new unique type of shard. And some shards will only be acquirable from combining. For example, the crop bug attribute for farming will increase the odds of obtaining crappies, squash, and fermentos, and you can only get it from obtaining a beetle shard through a fusion. And then we get to see another attribute that they're adding, combat trap. Your traps catch combat creatures a percentage faster, and these are obtained from hunting a dusty bit, which is another mob that we haven't heard about until now. And then we get to hear about what happens to all the attributes that are currently added into the game. Basically, during the new transition to the new system, they will ensure that you retain your existing progress and will be more generous than they probably should be. But they don't want you to feel like you lost something. However, I'm guessing they're not really going to take into account god rolls very much. They're probably going to mainly focus on how much you've upgraded an attribute and not how much you've spent acquiring a god roll. So for example, if you have a level 7 attribute, they'll probably give you more than turning in a level 4 attribute. But if you're turning in these attributes off of a god set, for example, Mana Pool, Mana Regen, Aurora, they'll probably give you the same amount of attributes as if you had turned in a non-god set. For example, Undead Resistance, Blazing Resistance. So it's going to depend more, in my guesstimations. If I had to guess, it's probably going to depend more on the level of the attributes rather than the god rolls. But what's going to happen to Kudra? Basically, they're going to revamp Kudra's loot table, and they still want the rewards to be relevant and exciting. So if I had to guess, there may be an item that they'll add to Kudra's loot table that you need to make traps in order to get more shards from the new hunting system, or maybe they'll add an equipment set or something that will allow you to catch mobs faster. But again, that's just a guess. Attributes will remain visible on your items as grayed out features until you choose to integrate them into the new system. While this update may impact the game's economy, they're committed to minimizing any adverse effects and ensuring a fair transition for all players. And then we get to see a picture down here, which I'm guessing is like the Jerry God temple. or something like that. It's got candles, so another new block being implemented, but can't really tell exactly what this is, and we probably won't know until the update comes out. Okay, next is one of the biggest blogs that we've gotten for the Foraging update, Dev Blog 12, which was released in August of last year, and we get to see when they first announced the Foraging update that was supposed to come out 4 years ago. We're going to talk a little bit less here about all of the yapping that goes on. I already made a video talking about all of their plans and how everything went wrong and they had to restart a lot of things to make the Foraging update come out eventually instead of actually coming out in 2021 like it was supposed to. I didn't mention this one in the last thread, but we also got to see another section here where they use some of the blue soul lanterns and then some new trapdoors, things like that. But in this picture, you can see up here in the top left, there is like some crimson trees up here. And then back here behind this, you can see there's a snow section up here. So maybe just a little glimpse at a couple of the other islands that are included with the Foraging update. But they're planning on releasing the first of the 3 Galatia islands since it's now completed. The only problem is back-end changes. But you can see a couple of the things that they've made right here. They've got Shellwise, one of the turtles just swimming around in the water. They've got some frogs. They've got salmon. All this stuff is from newer versions of Minecraft that isn't in 1.8, but will be added onto the Galatia Island. And then another part that we get to see is a new world warp map where you can click to warp to different sections, which is pretty cool. And again, this is just a work in progress, new UI that they're planning on adding that they can only do because of its newer version. And then we get to see something else they're working on, which they can now do because of it being a newer version, which is custom mobs. So they can make their own custom hitboxes and things like that, custom designs for custom creatures that aren't in the base version of Minecraft. Plus you can see they've made some crates in the background, so their own resource packs and stuff like that, as well as a new resource for torches here. And finally, we have the SkyBlock 2024 recap released on December 18th of last year. And they don't talk too much about Foraging update here, but basically the first island is almost finished with development along with a new hunting skill, but the island will be in the latest version and focus on exploring some of the vanilla latest version mobs like axolotls, strays, and many others. So as I said earlier, strays are getting added with this island as well as axolotls. And this is the part that gets a lot of people nervous, this sentence right here. They understand that your expectations for this update are really high at this stage and it'll be hard to meet them, but they think that this will be the first major step into the future of SkyBlock. So they don't sound super duper confident that they'll be able to meet the expectations, which I do think most people's expectations are probably through the roof at this point, but I have high hopes. They've worked on it for 3 years. If it's a flop at this point, it's kinda Jover, but I've never known Hypixel to spend this much time on an update and have it flop. So I have high hopes. Let me know what you guys think about this update in the comment section. I read all the comments, so make sure to let me know your thoughts. And yeah, this information was spread out over like 4 years, so I figured it's a good time to go ahead and compile everything, get it in one spot so we all know what to expect. But I hope y'all enjoyed. Again, if you haven't already, smash that sub button for me. On our way to 20k subs, and once we get there, I'm doing a 1,000,000,000 coin giveaway, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. God bless.